It started as a quiet morning at the fishing dock, seagulls overhead, the gentle lapping of water, and a lone veteran named Hank casting his line. Hank wasn't there for the fish as much as for the peace. He had a weathered face, a slow, deliberate way about him, and an air of calm that hinted at stories untold. But the calm wouldn't last. A loud roar of engines shattered the stillness as a group of bikers pulled up. They were brash, full of swagger, and clearly looking for trouble. At first, Hank ignored them, focused on his line. But it wasn't long before their teasing turned to taunting. They underestimated him, a man who'd seen more than they could imagine. What they didn't know was that Hank wasn't just any veteran. He was someone you didn't mess with, and they were about to find out why. The bikers leaned against their rumbling motorcycles, their laughter echoing across the dock. They weren't locals, and it was clear they didn't care about respecting the peaceful spot. One of them, a tall guy with a skull patch on his jacket, called out, "Hey, old man, catch anything today? Or you just here to waste time?" Hank didn't respond. He didn't even look their way, keeping his eyes on the water. His silence only fueled their need for attention. Another biker, smaller but louder, sauntered over, knocking over a bucket of bait with his boot. "Oops," he said with a smirk. What the bikers didn't see was Hank's hand tightening around his fishing rod. It wasn't fear, it was control. Inside, Hank was calculating. These men didn't realize who they were provoking, and Hank wasn't one to lose his cool easily. But everyone has their limits. Hank let out a slow breath, steadying himself. He wasn't about to start something, but he sure wouldn't let these bikers walk all over him either. The tall one with the skull patch chuckled, clearly enjoying the show. "What's wrong, old-timer? Cat got your tongue." He jeered, stepping closer. Hank calmly reeled in his line, the hum of the spinning rod barely audible over the biker's laughter. He still hadn't said a word, and his silence was starting to unnerve at least one of them. The smaller biker, who'd kicked over the bait bucket, muttered, "What's his deal? He's not even flinching." One of the bikers, a woman with bright red hair and sharp eyes, stayed back, studying Hank. She sensed something different about him, something dangerous, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. "Hey, maybe we should leave him be," she said, but her voice was drowned out by the others. Hank placed his rod down carefully and stood, his movements slow and deliberate. Without raising his voice, he finally spoke. "You boys having fun?" His tone was calm, almost too calm. The group froze for a moment, caught off guard by his unexpected words. They had no idea they'd just crossed the line. The air around the dock seemed to shift, growing heavier as Hank stood there, his calm gaze fixed on the bikers. For a moment, they didn't know how to respond. The tall one finally smirked, brushing off the unease. "Yeah, old man, we're having a blast. Question is, are you?" Hank tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing just enough to suggest they were dangerously close to finding out what kind of man he really was. "Fishing's supposed to be peaceful," he said, his voice steady. "Shame when folks don't respect that." The smaller biker stepped up, emboldened by the group's laughter. "You got a problem with us, Grandpa. Maybe you should go find a quieter spot before things get messy." Without a word, Hank shifted his stance, his hand brushing against the pocket of his worn jacket. The red-haired biker's eyes widened slightly, sensing the tension reaching its breaking point. "Guys, I'm serious. Let's just go," she said again, her voice sharper this time. But the others didn't listen. The tall one took another step closer, towering over Hank. "What are you gonna do about it, huh?" he said, leaning in with a sneer. Hank didn't flinch. "You sure you want to find out?" he asked, his tone even. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. and suddenly the dock felt a whole lot smaller. The tall biker let out a mocking laugh, but there was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. "Big talk for an old guy," he said, though his bravado felt forced now. The group watched, the tension thick enough to cut through. Before anyone could say another word, the sound of a truck engine rumbled from behind them. All heads turned as an old, beat-up pickup pulled into view, the driver stepping out with purpose. He was a younger man, stocky and broad-shouldered, and the way he moved suggested he knew Hank well. "Everything all right here, Pops?" the man asked, his voice calm but firm. He wasn't smiling. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances. "This your son or something?" the smaller one asked, trying to sound tough, but failing to hide his nervousness. Hank didn't answer, but his eyes locked with the young man's for a brief moment, a silent exchange that spoke volumes. The tall biker tried to regain control of the situation, puffing out his chest. "Doesn't matter. We're just having a little fun. No harm done." The young man stepped closer, his jaw tightening. "Funny. It doesn't look like he's laughing." The red-haired biker suddenly stepped forward, her voice cutting through the mounting tension. "Enough. Let's go," she said firmly, looking directly at the tall one. But he wasn't ready to back down just yet. As the standoff escalated, Hank's calm demeanor remained unshaken. But deep down, the bikers had no idea just how prepared he and his unexpected ally were for whatever came next. The tall biker squared his shoulders, still clinging to his pride. "We don't want any trouble," he said, though his tone didn't quite match his words. But as he took a step closer, something shifted. Hank's son reached into the bed of the truck and pulled out a military duffel. He unzipped it slowly, pulling out a folded jacket with patches that matched Hank's. The sight stopped the bikers cold. "You don't know who you're dealing with," the younger man said quietly, his voice low but filled with meaning. "This man doesn't need backup, but he's got it if he wants it." Hank finally broke his silence with a small, knowing smile. "Still think you're the toughest guys on this dock?" he asked, his voice almost playful now. The red-haired biker stepped in front of the others, clearly done with the situation. "We didn't come here looking for a fight," she said firmly, shooting a glare at the tall one. "We're leaving. Now." As they turned to go, the tall biker hesitated, his face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and anger. But something about the look in Hank's eyes told him to think twice. Without another word, he climbed on his bike, revved the engine, and followed the others down the dirt road. When the dust settled, Hank's son glanced over. "You good, Pops?" Hank chuckled softly, never doubted it for a second. But as they packed up to leave, he paused and looked toward the horizon. Tucked into the water by the dock was a small military coin, a token Hank had quietly dropped during the standoff. A reminder to himself, and to anyone who crossed his path, that strength didn't always come with noise. As the sound of the motorcycles faded into the distance, the dock returned to its peaceful stillness. The seagulls circled lazily overhead, and the gentle rhythm of the water lapping against the wood filled the air again. Hank and his son sat side by side for a moment, neither saying much. "You always were good at keeping your cool," his son finally said, a hint of admiration in his voice. Hank smiled faintly. "Sometimes saying less says it all." They packed up their gear, taking their time as the sun dipped lower on the horizon. The day had turned out differently than expected, but it left a mark, a reminder of resilience, respect, and knowing when to stand your ground. As they drove off in the old truck, Hank glanced in the rearview mirror at the dock disappearing behind them. He didn't need trouble to prove himself. His calm presence spoke louder than words ever could.